Welcome to Death, Lies, and Alibis. I'm your host, Christy, and this is the podcast that dives deep into the dark and eerie world of local cold cases. We're in Newark, a small, lovely town nestled in the heart of Ohio. It's a place with tight-knit neighborhoods, friendly faces, and the sense of security you'd expect from any small town. But beneath this idyllic surface lies a hidden darkness, a collection of unanswered questions that have lingered over the years. So grab your headphones, lock your doors, and be prepared to enter a world where the truth has evaded justice. Hi, folks. Welcome to the podcast. If you're a returning listener, I'm glad you're here. And if you're new, I hope you stick around till the end. Today, we're looking into a haunting case that has weighed heavily on the town of Newark in Licking County for over 3 decades. Now, this is the story of Robert Bob Buehler, a man whose life, filled with kindness and simplicity, was tragically cut short by an act of evil brutality on May 8, 1991. Let's first meet Bob. At 39 years old, he was known throughout Newark, not just for his work as a painter, but for his gentle soul, his passion for photography, and his love for capturing the world through his lens. But to truly grasp the gravity of his loss, we need to get to know the man behind the crime. Born on April 25, 1952, to Paul and Charlotte Buehler, Bob spent his entire life in Newark, a town that, much like him, had a charm that was quiet and a strong sense of community. Growing up in the post-war years, he was deeply shaped by values of hard work, loyalty, and an unwavering connection to family and friends. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but those who knew him would tell you he was steady, reliable, and always there to lend a hand. He graduated from Newark High School, where he earned a reputation as someone you could count on. You know, your down-home, dependable guy. And his physical presence was big, but his heart was even bigger. He found joy in the simple pleasures of life. His love of photography was more than just a hobby. It was his entire way of capturing the world around him, preserving moments that might otherwise fade into memory. Bob was particularly drawn to black and white photography, often developing his own film in a makeshift darkroom he set up in his RV. A true hippie at heart, Bob lived simply and found a sanctuary in the RV, parked at his friend's home, where he stayed until he felt the need to wander and roam for a while. Then he'd be back before he knew he was gone. His choice to live in the RV spoke to his humble nature. He didn't need much to be happy, just a quiet place to call his own and the company of those who mattered most. Friends would often see him walking around town with his camera in hand, ready to capture a beautiful sunset, a child's smile, or the tiny details of the town's historic architect. His photographs weren't just pictures to him, they were pieces of his heart he shared with those he cared about. But his life wasn't only about work and art. Bob was a devoted son to Paul and Charlotte, and brother to Scott, and they were members of the St. Francis de Sales Catholic Church. Bob was more than a familiar face around Newark. He was a beloved friend, someone who left a lasting impact on those who really knew him best. And 2 of Bob's closest friends, Phoenix Phillip and Shannon Cummins, who considered him an uncle, shared fond memories that perfectly capture his gentle and caring nature. Phoenix recalls,
Bob was what we called a gentle giant. He was always kind to me and never spoke down to me or used baby talk, even when I was very young. I always felt safe with him. He was a vegetarian, though funny enough. He didn't eat many vegetables. He had this quirky love for Triscuits and green goddess dressing. It was his go-to snack. And his photography was beautiful. He took these stunning black and white photos that just captured the soul of whatever he was looking at.
And Shannon shared,
For me, Bob was like an uncle. He had this calm presence that made you feel secure. I've often thought about his death, and to be honest, I think it may have been a hate crime.
These memories paint a picture of a man who was deeply loved and respected, not only for his kindness, but also for the way he made those around him feel valued and safe. He was the kind of person who would stop and chat with neighbors, offer a helping hand when someone was in need, and always had a kind word for everyone. Although he occasionally worked for his father's painting business, it was his photography and silkscreening for shirts that truly reflected his artistic spirit. He also worked as a delivery driver, and he was the assistant manager at Two Guys Pizza on Cherry Valley Road. On the night of his murder, Bob wasn't on duty, which only deepened the mystery of what brought him to the cemetery that fateful evening. Bob's life was rich in creativity and grounded in his simple pleasures, a combination that made his untimely death all the more confusing. Perhaps it was the simple life, though, that made his murder all the more shocking. How could someone so unassuming, so kind-hearted, become the victim of such a violent and senseless crime? Well, everything changed on the night of May 8th, 1991. The quiet town of Heath, just a stone's throw away from Newark, was rocked by a discovery that would leave everyone reeling. 4 young adults, out for a late-night look at the city lights from Mount Calvary Cemetery, stumbled upon a sight that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There, lying just a few feet away from his Chevy Chevette, was the body of Bob Buehler. He had been stabbed 23 times in what Lincoln County Coroner Dr. Raker described as a vicious and brutal attack. The wounds were so severe that they cut through muscle and bone, one gash even severing the tip of Bob's right finger. Now, this is where things start getting cloudy right at the beginning. As investigators begin piecing together the events leading up to his death, they discover that just hours before his murder, he had been seen at the Southgate Shopping Center in the company of an unidentified man. The man was described as around 40 years old, 5'9", and approximately 280 pounds, with a completely bald head except for a small line of brown hair at the back, and he had a distinctive scar or nick on his right ear. The police developed a composite sketch of the man with Bob at the shopping center earlier that day, and we'll have that on our Facebook group for you folks to look over. Now, in small towns like Newark and Heath, rumors can spread like wildfire. And over the years, this particular story has continued to resurface about the night Bob had been killed. It's said that Bob was hit on by a man he had just met at the traveling carnival. You know, one of those pop-up carnivals that they used to set up like in the parking lots of shopping centers. Well, the story goes that after this encounter at the carnival, Bob returned to his father's house and he called the man. They allegedly made plans to go out to dinner. But instead of a restaurant, maybe their evening somehow ended at Mount Calvary Cemetery, a place known around town as Lover's Lookout because you can see the lights of Heath twinkling from the top of the hill. Now, whether there's any truth to this tale or if it's just local gossip, it's hard to say. But the fact remains that this mysterious man was never identified. And despite the police efforts, this Lee, like so many others, eventually went cold. But the idea that Bob's killer could have been someone he just met by chance at the carnival, I mean, a fleeting moment turned deadly. Well, this has kept the town talking for decades, and it fuels the speculation and suspicions. So what in the world happened? Why would anyone want to hurt Bob? I mean, this man kept to himself. He lived such a simple life. Who was this mystery man? The shock of finding Bob's body that night is something that has stayed with those who were there even after all these years. One of the young adults who made that tragic discovery reached out to share her experience with us. It's a side of the story that, well, it brings a deeply personal dimension to this case. Now, we're going to take a quick break right here, get a drink, walk the fur kiddo, check your email, but hurry back. Okay, thank you for coming back. Here we are. Here's what Amy Farley had to say about that fateful night her and her friends discovered Bob's lifeless body. Amy, can you take us back to that moment when you first saw Bob's body? What was your immediate reaction? And how did you process what you were seeing?
I was in high school at the time. Me and a few friends went for a drive. I'm from Utica, so I wasn't really familiar with the spots in Newark or Heath. One of the guys suggested we head to the lookout. We pulled into the cemetery and went up to the top where the rocks are. That's when we noticed a car just sitting there, still running. We sat there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what was going on. One of my friends thought maybe the guy was just drinking and passed out. After some arguing, I decided to get out and check. It was my car, and I was the one driving, so I felt like it was on me. I was only 17, and I was trying to act cool, but I was nervous. I got out and started walking towards the car, shouting, "Hey man, you okay?" But there was no response. As I got closer, I saw him lying there, blood all over him. I immediately panicked. My friends were still in the car, and when I screamed, they asked if I'd seen a ghost. I yelled back, "No! I think he's dead!" There were no cell phones back then, so I had to figure out what to do. The passenger door was slightly open, just enough that it wasn't shut all the way. That made me even more scared, like maybe someone else was still around. We drove straight to the police station to report it, but my friends never even got out of the car.
Finding Bob in that condition must have been incredibly traumatic. How has that impacted you emotionally over the years?
It was such a messed up thing to see, especially at that age. My best friend and I were still in school, and the cops told us not to tell anyone about what we saw. They even said to watch out for any cars that might follow us, which made the situation even scarier. We were already terrified after finding Bob, but now we had to constantly watch over our shoulders, wondering if someone saw us. For months after that, we were always on edge, watching every car and every person, scared that someone might be coming after us.
Immediately afterwards, did you ever question what you saw? Especially, how were your nerves?
My nerves were shot that night. The cop who took our report asked us to go back to the scene to show the other officers where I had walked and what I might have touched. As we retraced my steps, the officers found something in the weeds, which made them think someone else had been there when we arrived. We didn't pass any cars going in, and I still remember that the passenger door was open slightly when I got out to look, but we never saw anyone else there. It left a lot of questions.
Right, and as time passed, how have your memories of that evolved? I mean, are there some details that become more clearer, or are they getting foggier as time passes?
Honestly, when I saw your post on Facebook, it felt like that night just came rushing back to me, as if it had happened yesterday. Over the years, I've thought about it from time to time, but when I read your message, I could almost smell the blood again. I remembered the look on his face, almost like fear, and the amount of blood. It was overwhelming, and it brought all those memories right back.
After discovering Bob's body, did it change how you viewed the world? I mean, how your own sense of safety was?
Being that young, it definitely made me look over my shoulder for a few years. But I'll admit, it wasn't something that stayed with me constantly until I saw your post the other day. When I read it, it all came back stronger than it had in a long time. I can still picture the cemetery like I was standing there again. The cops didn't really tell us much after that night, and I only have a newspaper article that I come across from time to time.
You mentioned going back to the cemetery recently. What was that experience like?
I went back to the cemetery just the other day, and it was surreal. I could see the car, the smoke coming from the tailpipe. The smells, the look on his face, it all came flooding back. I could take you to the exact spot where we found him, and even show you where we were parked.
We want to thank Amy for sharing this very personal and troubling episode of her life with us. She hopes, like the rest of us, that Bob gets the justice he rightly deserved.
Getting answers would be amazing. I hope you're able to find out who did it, and maybe even why.
So hearing firsthand about the discovery of Bob's body, that just stresses to you people the sheer horror of that night. But it was the autopsy that truly revealed the extensive violence that was inflicted upon Bob. Dr. Raker's examination laid bare the brutal nature of the attack. Now, we'll have Bob's autopsy report on the Facebook group for us to examine. We do this for educational purposes and to help us better be informed about the case. And we also keep our group private out of respect for the sensitivity of the subjects and the documents we do share. So as mentioned earlier, Bob's body bore 23 stab wounds, injuries that mutilated his abdomen, back, face, arms, and legs. The fatal blow was a deep gash to his neck. It severed the artery and the windpipe, and it almost decapitated Bob's poor head. I know it's a tough thing to picture, and that's gruesome, folks, I know. And this is not a simple act. It takes a certain type of evil. I mean, was Bob's killer looking into his eyes when he was taking his life? What kind of person could do something like this? Or was it one person? Could there have been more than one attacker? Dr. Raker theorized that the nature and number of the wounds suggested possibly the possibility of multiple attackers. The weapon used was likely a large double-edged blade, such as a sword or a machete. Oh my goodness. All right, so listen to this. According to the FBI, a stabbing death is one of the most personal and instinctive forms of violence. Unlike other methods of killing, like such as a shooting, stabbing requires the perpetrator to be in close physical contact with the victim. So this closeness turns the act into something deeply personal, often involving multiple blows, which this did, and that can show intense emotion. It can be like rage, desperation, or even fear. The brutality of the stabbing is both physically and psychologically effective. The attacker confronts their victim face to face, often witnessing their fear and their pain up close, making the act not only physically exhausting, but emotionally charged as well. This intense level of personal violence often leads investigators to explore deeper motives, like what could the motive be? Could it be jealousy, betrayal, or deep-seated animosity? But in small towns like Newark and Heath, separating the truth from rumor has not been an easy task. And another rumor has persisted over the years, and it involves a possible affair between Bob and a local Heath police officer. Now, according to town gossip, Bob and this officer had been secretly seeing each other for some time. The officer was reportedly married with a family, and it's said that he kept his sexuality hidden from everyone. As the story goes, Bob grew tired of the secrecy, and he wanted the relationship to be out in the open, putting pressure on this officer. But instead of the truth coming out, Bob was murdered, and the officer seemingly vanished. Now, allegedly, after Bob's death, the officer's wife, she moved away and changed her entire name, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Now, whether there's any truth to this, or if it's just another piece of small-town gossip, it's something that has never been proven, but it's a big rumor. Still, the possibility that Bob's death could have been connected to a secret affair with a law enforcement officer, well, that just once again adds another layer to this unsolved case. So as we dig deeper into the case, a name that has surfaced is a person of interest is Gary Warner. Now, everything about Gary here is all allegedly. This is hearsay. I haven't even verified that there was a Gary except for maybe one or two sources, and that's not enough for me. But this was interesting because supposedly Gary wasn't just an acquaintance. Allegedly, he was a regular fixture in Bob's life, often partying with him in the very cemetery where Bob's body was later discovered. Those who knew them say Gary had a dark side. He was known to carry a machete. Now that just piqued my interest. He carried a machete into the front seat of his car, and when he drank, he had a dangerous temper. In fact, it was common for friends to call on Bob to calm Gary down when he went into one of his drunken rages. But on that fateful night, maybe there was no one to bring Gary back from the edge. Some believe that in a fit of drunken rage, Gary may have lost control, with no memory of the brutal act he had committed. Now, what makes this theory even more compelling is that Gary also disappeared shortly after Bob's death, and it was making people wonder if he was going to miss the funeral entirely. But he did reappear days later. But during my research, I found out that he had passed away a few years ago. And I heard he was cremated, taking any secrets he might have had about that night to his grave. The scene itself, an old isolated cemetery known for its seclusion, made it very difficult to piece together the events. Heath Police Detective Jeff Johnson noted in a report that there was considerable amount of blood at the scene, indicating Bob was fighting for his life. But beyond that, clues were scarce. And I can't help but think, if this happened today, with all the advancement in forensic technology, could we have more answers? I think we could. The investigation took another turn when the police began exploring the possibility that Bob's murder was a crime of passion. But we know Bob was openly gay, and there were rumors that this death might have been resulted in a jealous lover's rage besides the cop, like a regular boyfriend. Shannon, who spoke about Bob earlier, shared her perspective on the crime.
I think it may have been a hate crime. I think someone hit on him to lure him to the cemetery to kill him. Or maybe several of them were waiting to kill him. I mean, he was stabbed over 20 times. It definitely could have been more than one person.
Shannon also wondered if the perpetrator might have been someone struggling with their own identity.
I always wondered if it was someone who was gay but hated themselves because of it, and took the hate they had for themselves out on Bob. It definitely feels personal, not like it was by chance.
Shannon's reflections highlight the emotional impact of the crime on those who knew and loved Bob, and it emphasizes the lingering questions about the motive behind such a brutal and personal attack. What could be the means, motive, and opportunity here? Now, Sandy Buehler, that is Bob's sister-in-law, she expressed in an article in the Newark Advocate, saying,
"We didn't want to make the fact he was gay an issue, but now it is an issue because the police are focusing too much on it."
And it makes me wonder, did focusing on Bob's sexuality help or hurt the investigation? Remember, this was in 1991, a time when being openly gay was still taboo, especially in small towns like Newark and Heath. County Prosecutor Robert Becker, however, defended the investigation, stating that they had explored all possible motives given the brutality of the crime. Well, despite the ongoing efforts of the Heath Police and the Licking County Prosecutor's Office, the case eventually went cold. No arrests were made, and no new leads emerged. The brutal murder of Bob Buehler remains unsolved, leaving his family and friends to wonder who could have committed such a heinous act, and especially why. Years later, Heath Police Sergeant Jack Jones, who spent much of his career working on Bob's case, reflected on the unsolved mystery. He was reported saying,
"I would have liked to have taken care of the Buehler homicide. It's the only serious felony I've been involved in, and haven't made an arrest."
But despite the frustration, efforts to bring attention and get answers continue to this day. Licking County Crime Stoppers, they turn to the public for help in solving Bob's case, hoping to finally bring justice to his family. The beauty of Crime Stoppers is that anyone with information can contribute, and you can remain anonymous. Whether it was a big lead on the tragic death of Bob or any other small crimes, Crime Stoppers are great to turn in leads. Now, Licking County Crime Stoppers is still in operation, and we'll have that contact information on the podcast episode description for you. Okay, to the residents and citizens of Licking County especially, listen up. Your involvement is so crucial in our search for justice for Bob Buehler. This case has remained unsolved for over 3 decades. But with your help, we can bring new light to the investigation. If you have any information, no matter how small or insignificant it might seem, please reach out to Crime Stoppers or law enforcement. Remember, you can remain anonymous, and your courage and coming forward can make all the difference in the world. Let's come together as a community to ensure that Bob's story is not forgotten and that justice is finally served. I want to thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and tragic death of Bob Buehler. His story is a reminder of how fragile life is and the importance of community when seeking justice. And that's it for this episode of Death, Lies, and Alibis. We hope that by shining a light on these local cold cases, we have sparked something within you, our listeners. Because the truth is, solving these cases will take more than just our words. It's going to require the dedication and collective efforts of the entire community. Don't forget to hit the follow button on the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. To learn more about how to get your case featured on the show, or to get instant access to case files, reports, and many free resources, go to our Facebook group, Death, Lies, and Alibis, and join today. You can also email us at liesalibis@gmail.com. As always, be safe, stay alert, and never stop seeking justice.